Good afternoon, Terps. My name is Jeff Williams, the Director of Alumni Engagement at the Smith School of Business. Today's webinar is part of the Smith School Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development Webinar Series. Through these sessions, we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Topics have included, is a startup part of your second act? Burn the whiteboards, stop brainstorming and go ask customers these 5 questions. And today's topic, how to succeed in a future transformed by technology. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and our presenter will answer them as often as possible. And who is our presenter? I am pleased to introduce Charles Colby. Charles is the Chief Methodologist and founder of Rockbridge Associates, Inc., an innovative market research firm located in the DC area that solves business problems for Fortune 500 companies, technology firms, and nonprofits. He's a senior professional with over 30 years of experience in service quality measurement, market research, and marketing strategy formulation. He has designed and directed hundreds of studies for services business on topics like customer satisfaction, positioning and branding, segmentation, pricing, and product development. Charles directed a service quality measurement function for Citicorp, and he has worked for premier organizations such as Opinion Research Corporation and Westat, Inc. Charles has presented at numerous conferences on technology readiness, service quality, and internet data collection. He co-authored the book Techno-Ready Marketing, How and Why Your Customers Adopt Technology, and has written extensively on technology consumer behavior, workplace trends, and the association sector. Better yet, Charles is a double Terp. He graduated with his bachelor's and MBA from the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, and he is a senior fellow at the university's Center for Excellence in Service. I will now throw things over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the great introduction, and thank you to all our attendees for spending lunch break with me. I'm going to set out my goals for today, and I don't know if I can accomplish everything, but if I can do at least 2 out of 3 of the following, I think this will be a success. So there's kind of a joke here. I'm not going to certify you as a level 3 robotics technician, but I do want to make a point that the focus of this webinar, this presentation, will be all about consumer behavior and consumer research. And it'll focus on trends, mostly from research that I've done, much of it with colleagues at the Smith School, and also through Rockbridge, my company. And I'll talk about how consumers think and what people want and desire about technology, not the real technical or engineering aspects. And by learning about what people actually want in a marketplace, it'll define for you the paths or the roadways that ultimately technology will follow in the future. A lot of things that we'll cover today in terms of how technology affects our lives, how it affects how we live, how we buy, what we think is normal, how we work, about innovation cultures, and I'll even have a chance for you to evaluate your own techno-readiness. I want to mention that the bulk of this comes from a study which Rockbridge has done since 1999 with co-sponsorship from the Smith School called the National Technology Readiness Survey, and we've continually tracked the latest trends in the latest technology where consumers are thinking about that subject and how it evolves over time. A lot of this we publish, some of this with some colleagues at the business school. And some other stuff we'll be talking about actually comes from work which we've done for various Rockbridge clients, and that I think you find of interest. I'd like to start out by talking about how technology will change how we live. And one of my favorite topics is robots. And we've done some research. We've done this for the past 2 years in an area that we call service robotics. And the term robotics, if you're familiar with science fiction, was first coined by a famous science fiction writer, Isaac Asimov, in the 1940s. When we talk about service robotics, we're talking about robots which serve a purpose to help us in our personal lives, not industrial robots that you might see on an assembly line, which have been around for a long time. A service robot also has artificial intelligence where it's autonomous, and a service robot can move around in the physical space and possibly manipulate things in that space. It's not something that's just locked inside a computer. So what we've been doing is looking at consumer interest in different types of robots. And when you look at something that's cutting edge in a research context, we find that it's important to look not just at what is desirable to people, but also what people consider undesirable, because often there's a lot of resistance to a new technology or trend, and that impacts its immediate acceptance. So we looked at 5 different types of service robots recently, and I think the bottom line of what we learned is this. People want robots to clean their toilets and to alleviate them of drudgery, of hard work, things they don't want to do in life. So the number one leader, or the most interesting robot to people, is what we call a robotic home assistant, which is a robot that would autonomously handle physical labor tasks inside your home, including vacuuming, scrubbing floors, and cleaning bathroom fixtures, all controlled by computers. And we show here on the right a net desirability, and you find that for a lot of robotic technologies are really not that ready for the market, that there's more resistance than there is acceptance. And there's some acceptance, maybe more acceptance and resistance for a pilotless drone, which is already a technology that's starting to become ready to be launched in the general market, but something that would fly, and in this case would not have an actual pilot, but would be completely automatic. But then when you look at things like robots displacing what other people do, where maybe it's benefiting the service provider more than it is the consumer, you start to run into a level of resistance. And we've also found people are actually pretty resistant to driverless vehicles, and even more so using a driverless taxi or transit, much more resistance than acceptance. We've delved into the reasons for this, and there's certain attitudes out of several that we looked at that seem to differentiate why some people are really interested in service robotics and others resist them. And the 3 things that really stand out are your belief that robots are safe, and that's obviously a popular theme of science fiction, where robots ultimately cause us harm or turn on us. Another one is a belief that robots make people more productive, and another is that it gives them control. That just kind of gives you an idea as to how people think about this. Now, before I move on, I wanted to mention that I have been talking about this with Jeff. I think it'll be most beneficial if we take questions at the conclusion of this session. But Jeff will pipe in if he feels it would be really helpful to do some questions in the middle. Let's talk about another area of interest. It's something we just looked at this year. So a paper we'll be giving with Sunil Mithas from the Smith School faculty and another colleague, Parsu Parasuram at the University of Miami. And it's the idea of digitally rich experiences. These are features that enhance the ability to gather information, learn, and transact when interacting with the business online. And this is an area that first came up when we were doing research with IT people in the nonprofit sector, and many IT professionals feel that there's an issue with a lack of appropriately leveraging what's fully capable from a digital environment. And if you want an example, Think of what we call that thing you see when you go onto the web on your phone or your computer. It's called a web page. And a page is an archaic term that harkens back to basically a piece of paper that you write on or read. And it illustrates the fact that when we tend to build new technologies, experiences, particularly in a digital environment, we always kind of have a foot back in the original previous technology, and it's hard to think forward and fully leverage what could be possible to make a truly rich experience. And among one of the worst nightmares that IT and web designers will talk about is taking content and scanning it onto a PDF and then putting it up on a website. Kind of totally defeats the purpose. So we ask consumers about what kinds of digitally rich experiences would they be interested in, and it ranged from the very mundane to the very cutting edge. And the greatest reaction, greatest desirability right now among consumers is experiences that just make the immediate interaction richer, which is high resolution audio, richer color and imagery. A big thing is searchable videos, which you can control and go back and use as something you can mine for content, and interactive graphics, where you can do things like change the sizes and the colors on your own. And there's some things that are a little less of interest, but still some acceptance, which is moving images. We threw some very interesting ones, cutting edge. One is implying senses like feel, taste, and smell. And this is a big deal in an e-tailing environment. For example, one of our clients is a big clothing retailer, and they have issues with people wanting to sense what the fabrics are like when they're shopping, interacting. We also threw in a real cutting edge one. I don't think this technology exists yet, which is full sensory experience. And there's some moderate interest there, virtual reality, game-like experiences. But here's the things that have the least desirability. Interactive bots that might give you advice. Maybe it harkens to the Microsoft paperclip of a few years ago that was not overly popular. Interactive games and situations where you might actually role play out a game and see what the outcome is. Playing with your content, like sorting things into piles, and artificial universes where you can insert yourself and actually explore and experiment. When it comes to things like working with a bank or a hotel or buying things, people tend to not want that yet. But we have a way of telling what's future ready. Sometimes innovations are just beyond people. It's hard for people to fully grasp or appreciate, and you can get a sense of what might take off in the future by looking at things that have a much greater interest among the more techno-ready or visionary consumers. And when we look at it that way, certain things tend to really pop. One of them is games where you can interact with situations. And an example might be if you're applying for a loan or some kind of financial planning, you could play a game of life where you actually play out scenarios and then find out if you end up better or worse in your finances. Another is the artificial universes. Another is games where you can manipulate the content. Those are actually of much greater interest to techno-ready consumers and suggest they might really take off in the future. Another is game-like experiences when you're interacting with the service, and virtual reality or 3D experiences. The areas where these experiences would be the most accepted would be in shopping for apparel, for home furnishings, booking a hotel room, shopping for a vehicle. Some of the least interested areas for improving the experience would be in education, health education, banking, financial education, and applying for credit. People tend to not want the digitally rich experiences in those areas. I think it's really fun to delve further, like to kind of psychoanalyze people, say what's really driving their decision. So we divided the world into people who really prefer digitally rich experiences and people who prefer not to use digitally rich experiences in a service transaction context. And we have a method we call, or an approach called means end, and we use a type of laddering question. We can identify the immediate value that people get from a particular behavior. We can look at a higher level, an emotional psychosocial benefit, and ultimately how that links to an overall value orientation, the way they run their lives and what steers them in their broad decisions. And if you look at the bottom of this ladder here, people who prefer these experiences primarily want better information. They want the experience to be more enjoyable. They want to know they're using the best technology. But at an emotional level, in the yellow box, they want to be in control. They want it to be cutting edge. They want to feel entertained. And at a higher level, the values these types of people have is they always want to be learning and experiencing new things. They also don't want to be missing out on the latest and greatest technologies or innovations, and they want peace of mind. Now, the other half of the world wants nothing to do with these experiences, and for them, the more immediate thing at the bottom of this ladder is the standard, not making it complicated, is easier to learn, more convenient, and they're less likely to make mistakes. At a higher level, it makes them feel in control, that they're saving time and that they're safe. And ultimately, it gives them peace of mind. You know, they're not hassled. They can just go about life without having things too complicated for them. So that's just a little bit of insight into one future area you need to think about. Another thing I want to talk about is how technology will change how we buy. And I'll give you a few buzzwords, and many of you are maybe familiar with these, but if not, it's just a good buzzword to have in mind. One is omni-channel or omni-channel shopping. And this is an area we've been looking at for a few years because it's very relevant to many of our clients at Rockbridge, many who are e-tailers or retailers. And if you think about shopping, and how it used to be years ago before we had the web, the way people would buy things is you go into a bricks and mortar store, you shop, you pick it up, you pay for it, and you walk out with it in a single channel. When the web came online and e-commerce became more prevalent, we had another simple experience. You go on your computer or your smartphone, you shop, you go to a website, you check out, you pay for your merchandise, and you have it shipped, but all using primarily a single channel. And you may have heard about things like bricks and mortar stores are in trouble, and they are to some extent, but it's a little more complicated than that. What's really happening is shopping experiences are becoming much more complicated and utilizing multiple channels. We looked at this a couple of years ago, and we found out that when you take shopping experiences, these are experiences where people spend more than $50, about 2/3 of them are checkout at a store and 1/3 are checkout online. Many of them, like the pie slice in the upper right-hand corner, in person only, are very simple. Another simple one is the simple digital shoppers on the left there. 20% of people shop that way. But increasingly, consumers have a much more complicated way of conducting their shopping, and they're utilizing multiple channels. And to some extent, it's starting to become very complicated. For example, someone might walk into a store, look at merchandise, go home, research it on their computer, go back into the store, maybe shop around, ask some questions of the employees, do some more research on their smartphone while they're there, maybe while they're in the store they'll purchase, but they'll purchase it on their smartphone, but they might have it shipped to the store and pick it up there. We find that really low-tech people like this in-person only experience, and really high-tech people tend to just do everything online. There's a group of people we call pioneers who have more complicated views in technology. They're very innovative, but also tend to have a lot of issues with technology and concerns, and they're just more hyperactive, complicated people. They're really spearheading this use of omni-channels when they shop. And we've also seen it in other sectors like banking. So there's a good buzzword, omni-channel shopping. Another buzzword, if you aren't already thinking about it, using it, is the on-demand economy. The on-demand economy is also changing how we buy, and the on-demand economy involves the use of a platform, a technology platform, typically an app, and it brokers a purchaser of a service with a buyer of a service. So for example, if you take a ride using Uber or Lyft, Uber or Lyft is not the actual provider, they're simply a facilitator, and it's connecting you, the rider, with the transportation provider, who's an independent worker. We did some work last year, and this was in a Harvard Business Review blog, where we quantified the size of this market. And we estimated that it's about a $58 billion a year market, and this was last year. So I'm sure it's grown now, and we have some new data. We haven't finished analyzing it yet. At the time we looked at it, a lot of it was just in people buying and selling merchandise, but still there was a lot of participation in other services like transportation or having food and grocery delivered or freelancing on platforms, and 22.4 million consumers per year. Now we wanted to know, will this grow? And first of all, we know that the major consumers of these services tend to be millennials, and you can see half of them are age 18 to 34. But then we did another type of analysis, similar to what I talked about before with digitally rich experiences. We took all the on-demand economy consumers and we classified them by technology segments, by how likely people are to embrace new technology. And then we compared that to the general public. And you look all the way in the left, there's a segment we call explorers, or the most techno-ready. We know this based on a set of psychographic questions we asked them in our surveys. You're going to have a chance to take these same questions later on at the end of this webinar. And we know that there's a much larger percentage of these people represented in the on-demand economy than in the U.S. population. Now, why does that matter? When you see a disparity like this, it tends to imply that this is a growing market, that has a lot of potential to diffuse in the general population, and it's going to tend to take off or accelerate in the future. Another thing I wanted to talk about is technology will change what's normal. In an area, I've had a lot of work in this, I've even been involved as an expert witness in this years ago, is in the whole issue of digital privacy. So we just did we have soon coming out a little article or blog post on this topic, and I have a colleague who did most of the writing of this, and she's a millennial. Very smart person, but we posed the question of would you sell your digital information and how much for? And from her perspective, she poses as this really cool idea. There's an opportunity. You could go out and maybe make some money, and companies could make money. And as the editor of this, I said, send it back. Okay, go ahead, revise this, because I see this in a much more cynical way. Giving up your digital privacy is like crossing a boundary. It's a fundamental change in how we think. So we posed the question, how much would you be willing to sell your private digital information for? Things like the websites you go to, a lot of behavior. This is not things like your social security number of that nature, but just all of your behavioral information, just make it available to someone. And 48% of consumers said they wouldn't sell it for any price. However, half of consumers did have a price, and that average price was $250. We posed a similar question in the same survey: would you be willing to view advertisements and be paid for it? And this is a cooler idea, particularly when it came to email. 90% of consumers would be willing to be paid to view email ads. The going price they would want for this is $2. 40% text messages, they want $1 a text message. More resistance to viewing or hearing advertising on their phones or on their mobile phones. But I think a very interesting point about this is that there might have been a point where giving up your privacy or willingly exposing yourself to ads was crossing a border. It was sacrosanct not to do so, but this is changing. We're starting to think differently about this. And as we talk about in this white paper we have coming out, it's mainly millennials who are more receptive to that concept. Technology will also change how we work. So I talked earlier about the on-demand economy, and I talked about the demand side of that. But clearly, there's a supply side, the actual providers. And we have done surveys of this. We do one major study with Intuit, and you can actually see this online. There's some interesting stuff on it, on the 5 faces of the on-demand economy, of the different attitudes and segments of this group. But at the same time, we've also surveyed on-demand economy providers about the biggest advantages of providing this work, and we found the major one is increased income. It's just a way to earn some money on the side or have an income. And a quarter of these workers also feel it gives them more flexibility. On the drawback side, a quarter of them feel that the compensation's not so great. And one of the issues with an on-demand platform or economy is that you're competing with other workers in an open market. So it can have an impact on how much money you might get for your services. Another issue is the need to provide capital. So if you're driving for Uber or Lyft, for example, you're also providing the vehicle. Or if you're signing up with Airbnb and becoming an innkeeper, you're providing the inn. Another big thing that we've looked at for about 7 years now, and this is with the main sponsor of this is a company that is local to the DC area, MBO Partners, which helps companies and individuals in independent work. And we also do this with a company or a consultancy called Emergent Research, some colleagues of ours. And we've tracked the size and trends in independent work. This is working not through a traditional occupation where you have a W-2 form, for example, but more where you might be freelancing or a temporary assignment. Looking at this over the past several years, we found that there's about, maybe almost 40 million people who participate in one way or another in this economy. But there's a core group of people, about 16 million, who actually make that, like that's perhaps their primary or a major part of their income. They work at least 15 hours a week as an independent. And then there's variations. For example, some people we count as part of this economy are just performing non-traditional activities like driving for Uber or Lyft, for example. We have noticed that this poses amazing opportunities for people, but also this so far has not been growing dramatically. Most people still tend to rely primarily on a traditional type of employment. But technology is a factor behind this independent work. For starters, I'll mention who's participating in this. The largest group are millennials, but also many Gen X and boomers. And when we ask, why do you do this? The advantages tend to be flexibility and also an opportunity to earn more money, and then some other factors, and it tends to vary by the age cohort. We kind of get a sense that among millennials, many of them actually want to start their own venture. They have a big dream and they start it right off. There are other millennials that maybe they want a more traditional employment and have trouble finding this, so they take a temporary position, and I think they're maybe less happy. And then as you get into Gen X, it's an opportunity to work at home and be with your children. And by the time you get to boomers and matures, an opportunity to just offer a valuable skill and make money. We know that increasingly this independent work is done from a home or office workshop location, not at another site or an office or a job site. This number of people working out of their home conducting independent work has increased in the past 4 years, and I think I've seen some more recent numbers we've collected where it's about half of the workers at this point. Again, this is independent work, and it is technology that is facilitating this work to a large degree. I will mention we did an interesting study, actually go back to this a second, with the Smith School a few years ago. There had been a big scandal about people potentially collecting, maybe sort of like cheating their employers out of work. This was the perception, by doing things online in the office. So in this tracking survey we did with the Smith School, we asked an interesting question. First we asked, how much time do you spend on the internet doing things for personal purposes at work? But then we asked, when you're at home, how much time do you do things for work on the internet? And we found that, in fact, the internet had a huge impact on people tending to shift work from home, and they were actually working harder and more and not less as a result of having technology available at home and work. So we're talking about work. Let's talk a little bit about workplaces. And the real winners of the future will have innovation cultures. We've done research with a local company local to the DC area called 3 Pillar. And they help large companies with product development. Many of their clients are traditional firms, could be movie studios, educational institutions, but developing products to help their customers, mostly technology products. But they sponsored this study, and it also involved Professor Mythos at the Smith School to look at what drives product development success and innovation. And we found a number of things seem to drive innovative cultures. The more innovative companies are willing to accept failure, they're collaborative, they encourage innovations and creativity from the top down, they work across silos. You don't have to write a memo to your pointy hair boss who then has another pointy hair boss send it down to a peer across a silo. You just walk next door and talk to people and collaborate. You have there's support from management for innovation, there are resources from management. We also know that these innovative cultures tend to be more diverse. And we've actually done some pretty heavy-duty analysis on this with Professor Mythos, and we found that diversity has an impact, particularly when it's in the form of diversity of who participates in decisions. If you have both technical people and managerial people like a marketing or business person working together on product development. That kind of diversity leads to success. Another kind is offshoring, where you introduce the perspectives of another culture. Outsourcing, in its purest sense, doesn't seem to have as much of an impact on innovation. Another big thing is agile processes. And in this study, we counted up how many agile processes are adhered to in developing new technology-based products in an organization. And there's a huge correlation between the number of agile processes and the innovativeness of the company. Now, agile refers to, it's a very widely used term. It originally comes from software development, and it talks about steps that essentially streamline and speed up the development process within a company. But the term agile, as you may have noticed, is used very widely now across a lot of different sectors. There's agile market research and agile human resources. But generally, it's an onus on all of us to try to speed up and operate more leanly in how we accomplish core functions. Now finally, let's talk about the most interesting thing, which is you and the concept of techno-readiness. An area that I've done a lot of work for the past 20 years now, and a lot of it in collaboration with my colleagues at the Smith School, but it's also a core part of what we do at Rockbridge, is assessing consumer techno-readiness. And we know through some very serious research, which has been published in peer-reviewed journals, subject of a book, is that people have multifaceted views on technology. You can't just line us up all on a bell curve from early adopters to laggards, but rather we all possess a combination of contributors and inhibitors in how we embrace technology. And these dimensions tend to be fairly independent of each other. You could have all the contributors in your mindset as well as all the inhibitors. So you're a tortured soul that has a love-hate relationship with technology. The contributors include optimism. You believe technology does good things like giving us more mobility and productivity. Or you could just be innovative in the sense of liking to play with, tinker with things and learn about new technologies and ideas. The inhibitors are your sense of control over technology, a discomfort, and insecurity, or the fear that technology can lead to bad things or bad outcomes. Often when people blame a technology for causing a problem in society, like distracted driving, for example, we might blame texting or other things, and those are valid things to be concerned about, but often we're thinking about the technology that causes it and not about the low-tech things that might cause the same problems. We just inherently blame technology. That's just a human trait. We know there are demographic correlates with being highly techno-ready. We find that by the time one's in their mid-50s, they tend to become less techno-ready. And I presented this to some people in IT areas, and it's very disturbing to them because they view it as like suddenly turning into a zombie or falling apart. But it's not necessarily a bad thing because often the more senior people are the ones who sign the checks for new technology, and it might be reassuring that they're a little more skeptical. Techno-ready people tend to have college degrees. They rely on unconventional sources for news. This is just something we threw into our last tracking study. They're more likely to be a person of color. They're more likely to work in a technology realm. They're more likely to work in general, more likely to be single and to live in an inner city. These are not absolutes. You could be, for example, in your 70s or 80s, but extremely techno-ready, and you could be a very young person and very fearful or uncomfortable with technology. We also know that people possess different combinations of these technology beliefs, and we can assign people to segments: avoiders, hesitators, skeptics, pioneers, and explorers. And avoiders are your classic laggards who don't like technology and avoid it, and they tend to be much older people. Explorers are your classic nerds who just love technology and want to try it to its maximum. But then we have some people that are very important in marketing and introducing that new technologies. One group are skeptics who really don't have much of a connection to tech. And with them, they need to be convinced that new technology is valuable to them, and then they'll accept it, they'll embrace it. And then we have people we call pioneers who have this love-hate relationship. They really want new technology and they want to try it, but they need help and reassurance in doing so. Now in a second, I'm going to give you a link to a little quiz where you can take your own, I'll even show it to you now. It's at tinyurl.com, and you have the words RBTRI. If you will go to that on your computer, and it'll be open all day, so you don't need to rush, you can actually take a little quiz to see where you stand on this. But I just want to kind of wrap up here, and then we'll take some questions on how you succeed in a techno-ready future, just a few words of advice. And one of these is, let changes in how people buy, work, and think become opportunities. Don't worry about being disruptive or threatened, but always see the changes that come from technology to be an opportunity to stimulate your thinking and try new things. Another thing is, don't confuse the future with the present. We're not all, for example, driving for Uber and Lyft, okay? We're not all in the on-demand economy. $58 billion is not huge in a multi-trillion-dollar economy. So there's a tendency to think that the next big thing is what's going on now in the present, and you need to guard yourself against that, or you'll make flawed decisions. Think about the ethical implications of a digital world. There's a lot of concerns about privacy right now in the business world and the government world. And if you're not careful, you could get in serious trouble. Plus, you just need to think ethically in how you make your own decisions. I think you should seek to work in an innovative environment, and if you have power, try to make it so. Add your own influence. And finally, I gave you that little link. Assess your own personal beliefs about technology and understand it's not a test. It's not a competence measure. So whether you're skeptical or highly innovative, make the way you think about technology a strength. And as I said, you need people who are really innovative, who want to try new things, to spearhead new innovations, but at the same time, sometimes a lot of money and risk is riding on these technologies. And it might be a little bit reassuring that sometimes the people who make the final decision or sign the checks are a little bit more skeptical and need to be convinced. Here's my contact information if you want to send me an email, and my Twitter handle. And in addition, feel free, if you want to get updates on this, you can follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter for Rockbridge. And I'll open this up now to questions.
Great, thank you, Charles. And if everyone would like to submit any questions you may have via the Go to Questions box, we do have a few that have come in already. One's from Maynak asking a little bit more about the group that you were using for the survey. What was the group, and what was the portion that made up the pre and post baby boomer generation? And also, what level of education range was the survey population? I believe that this was for one of your prior examples.
Yeah. For much of this, the National Technology Readiness Survey, this is the sample is comprised of general sample of consumers who are from an online panel. The thing that might make them a little different is they are all online, but actually now a very large percentage of the population are online. But we then take this sample, we balance it to be reflective of the general U.S. population, and then what we do is we weight it to match the U.S. population on education, age, race, and gender. So I would consider this all a cross-section of the U.S. population.
Great. And another question here. Do you think artificial intelligence and robots will be creating or perhaps causing a drop in human labor? And then a follow-up is, which industries are most likely to be affected?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. There's a strong concern now, or fear, among people that artificial intelligence will cause a shortfall in the workplace, that many important tasks, particularly in white-collar type professions, will be performed by new applications, and you've seen this over time. My belief is there's not going to be, in the long run, a major impact on the labor force. We've always had new innovations for the past 5,000 years, and the labor force has tended to always come into sync with full employment. Warren Buffett talked about this a few days ago, and what he said is the issue is not loss of jobs, but disruption. And he gave one example, which was a company that's actually owned by Berkshire Hathaway that's in his company's portfolio, which is Geico Insurance. And a lot of the work done in the insurance sector, such as underwriting, might be displaced by artificial intelligence. But it was also Warren Buffett's belief that you can educate people or train them to take on new jobs, and it'll ease this disruption. In the long term, it won't be an issue. And that's my feeling as well. And sometimes when you actually automate a particular area, it creates more jobs rather than reduces, because it brings down the price of a particular service and increases demand for that service.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? If anyone in our audience, you can feel free to submit a question. We'll wait around here for another minute or two. Charles, do you have any advice for people who may be working with companies that are perhaps a little bit more resistant to change? So the culture of their organization may not be one of being techno-ready.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I know that I think it would be helpful to study how people think about technology. If the people maybe at a level above you have control over decisions, you might find that the issue is not that they hate technology, but that they just really don't think about it, don't care about it. And what you'd want to do is make a case for people like that as to how a new technology or innovation will benefit them or the company, to actually lay it out in a very rational way. It's people like that we call skeptics. They tend to be people who really have nothing against technology, but they just don't love it. They're just not excited about it, and they're open to rational arguments. And then there's other people where what you need to do is, in convincing them, is to try to reassure them that it's safe, to point out that there's no unintended consequences. And the other thing you would do is to try to work on the usability, to try to make it easier for them. Offer support or advice on how to use technology. So if it's within a workplace environment and you're trying to get people to try new things, and you're, say, the young person, the entry-level person, always be available to go and offer some help to the people who are less techno-ready, and then you might find they'll start using the new innovations.
And as a follow-up to that question, we had one come in. I would expect resistance to technology would decrease over time. How true is this from your research?
We've been tracking the trends for about 15 years now, and the basic distribution of people by segments has been very consistent. It hasn't grown or decreased. It varies little across cultures. In individual technology, you will find greater acceptance and less resistance. So what will happen, for example, with online banking, we found there's a huge concern about the safety of it in maybe 15 or 10 years ago, and now it's ubiquitous. It just people widely accept it, and there's limited concerns. But when something is new, you're going to encounter the issues of the resistance to it. But one thing that comes up is people think that, well, the world is different now, that something's different now in 2017 than the past 5,000 years, and that we're very unique. Things have changed, that applications and AI and robots and things have changed how things are going, that millennials are a very unique generation in terms of what they came of age with. And I'd say that contradicts what we've seen, over history. There's always been some major new technology, and the themes have always been the same in terms of people resisting or needing acceptance, and then innovators trying to propel it forward. So really not much has changed. It's just the technologies themselves that are changing. And the level of techno readiness has remained fairly constant in the population.
Great, and we have another question here. Charles, can you please talk about the risks and thus problems that technology and robots have created? And then how can we assess the unknown risks of the future technology that's yet to come?
I would say one thing, and this is maybe not a helpful answer, is that it gets back to this point I mentioned that we tend to, when something is newer, cutting edge, that we tend to look at it in terms of, because it's a new technology, we point a finger at it, where actually tends to be an irrational concern. We kind of put it on trial for being risky. But if we were trying something in a new way, but it was an older technology, older approach, we wouldn't put it on trial. So you tend to find often that the risks are really overstated. Just the whole idea that something that cleans your house or vacuums, cleans your toilets or so on, is going to be dangerous or has a serious risk. I don't think there's anything deep or subjective or that you really need to probe in. The pros and cons of it are pretty clear cut. And so I think that we tend to, as I said, irrationally worry about technology when it's more of a feeling as opposed to a rational viewpoint. I'm not sure that helps answer the question there. I think if I was introducing a new kind of robotic technology as a policymaker or a company, I would just go about it in a very rational way and study the technology and do usability testing and study how it works and do economic analysis and just accept it as it is.
Great, and we got one more question here. So technology is changing so rapidly that one would probably not have a chance to accept it before it's replaced with something new. So for example, about 10 years ago, nanotechnology was the way of the future, and now it's collecting dust. What are your thoughts on that?
There's always a rapidly changing technology, and there's always an issue there. I think on say at a company level, you should embrace the diversity in techno readiness of your workers and decision makers. And what I said before was that you would have some people who are very visionary and can see the future possibilities of a new technology, what we call explorers. And what's great about explorers is there's a risk of not embracing a technology and being disrupted. And many companies and organizations are finding this now. So don't forget that kind of risk. At the same time, there's the reverse kind of risk, which is a potential danger, unintended consequence. And I think nanotechnology, maybe its impact on the environment, is a very good example. And there you'd want decision makers who are more skeptics or pioneers who would be more reluctant in their acceptance and who would want to be convinced. And it's actually healthy to have more senior people in an organization who might be less techno-ready, who would challenge things and need to be convinced. So you just need a balance. But I would be cautious to think that there's some uniqueness about our age here. I was reading a very interesting book the other day, and it was written in the 19th century. And in it, the person talks about a group of people involved in a war where they marched from northern Connecticut to southern Connecticut, and it took them about 2 days to do this. And this writer in the 19th century mused about, isn't it amazing that now you can do that same trip in 3 hours in a Pullman, which is essentially a train or a locomotive transportation. So you go from 2 days of walking to 3 hours. And actually today, that's probably about the same amount of time if you've been through the traffic through Hartford. So there's always been major innovations and changes. And we studied Thomas Edison. One of the things that was going on in his age in the late 19th century was you had telegraph, and he figured out a way to have a duplex through telegraph where you could send two transmissions through the same wires. Then he came up with quadruplex, then he came up with octoplex. Those were his early innovations, and they had a massive impact on the transmittal of information, and it had a huge impact on certain industries like stock exchanges and Wall Street. So there's always something going on, always an innovation that's changing society.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles. And I'm going to go ahead and say we'll have to end there, but thank you for the thought-provoking discussion. It was a great session today. And thank you to all of our Terps who attended the webinar. We hope you join us for our next 2 webinars coming up next month. On June 6th at noon, we'll be presenting the webinar, Employee versus Independent Contractor. What is the difference and why it matters? And on June 7th at noon, we'll be presenting the webinar, Why You Need an Estate Plan Regardless of Your Age. A recording of today's webinar will be posted to the Smith School alumni website. Have a great day and go Terps!